On the morning haze of North Africa, where dust drifted like a veil over the broken ridgelines near Kasserine Pass, 5 Sherman tanks moved with a clarity that defied the battlefield itself. Their crews could not see one another. The terrain splintered their sight lines. The smoke of artillery blurred every horizon. Yet the American formation advanced as if bound by an invisible thread, turning, accelerating, and converging with a precision no German commander believed possible without flags, flares, or shouted commands. For the soldiers watching from panzer turrets, the moment felt unsettling, almost unreal. How could these American tanks maneuver with such unity when Doctrine said they should have been blind? Where did this instinctive coordination come from? The answer did not lie in armor thickness, firepower, or any visible advantage. It lived in the quiet hum of unseen waves radiating from within every Sherman, binding their crews into something larger than any individual machine. And so the question hangs over that dusty morning. In a war defined by steel and fire, could the most decisive weapon be something the enemy could not see at all? Long before those Shermans rolled through the dust of North Africa, the foundations of their advantage were quietly being built in workshops thousands of miles away. In 1941, as German armored divisions surged across the Soviet frontier with the confidence of seasoned veterans, American engineers were wrestling with a different question. What if victory in armored warfare would belong not to the tank with the thickest armor, but to the army that could speak the clearest? The United States had entered a period of rapid military transformation. Its armored forces were still young, its doctrine still forming, but its industrial and scientific potential was vast. Within the Signal Corps and inside the Galvin manufacturing laboratories, soon to be known as Motorola, a group of engineers began shaping what would become one of the most important shifts in the history of mechanized war. Daniel A. Noble championed the leap toward frequency modulation, a technology that promised clarity in the chaos of battle. Henryk Magnuski solved the brutal engineering challenge of installing sensitive electronics inside a metal machine that shook like an earthquake and roared like a factory. Their creation, the SCR-508, was not merely a radio. It was a new way of thinking about warfare. At 181 pounds, the system added no firepower, no armor, no speed. Yet it turned an ordinary medium tank into a connected instrument of coordinated action. 10 preset channels, crystal-controlled stability, and a transmitter powerful enough to cut through engine noise and desert heat, all of it woven into a battlefield, where the German Panzer force still relied on amplitude-modulated sets designed before the world understood what modern armored warfare would require. Germany had pioneered the idea of radio-enabled armored tactics in the 1930s, but by the early years of the war, its production simply could not keep pace with its expanding front lines. Many Panzer High Force carried only receivers. Even fewer mounted the full FAG-5 transceiver. Command tanks, marked by extra antennae, became obvious targets. Once destroyed, entire platoons fell silent. Orders could be heard but not answered. Threats could be seen but not reported. Across the desert, across the mountains, across the fields of Europe, German armor often fought as isolated machines, rather than a unified force. This imbalance shaped the earliest American battles of the war. When the first two Armored units landed during Operation Torch in November 1942. Their crews were still inexperienced, their tactics untested, their confidence unsteady. But the radios inside their tanks delivered something priceless, the ability to stay connected, even as the battlefield collapsed around them. It was a capability the Germans did not expect and were not prepared to counter. The stage was set. The Americans were not yet skilled, nor were their tanks superior. But they carried a weapon no one could see, one that would redefine every engagement that followed. The true test of America's new communication advantage emerged not in laboratories or training grounds, but in the chaos of Tunisia. At Kasserine Pass, in February 1943,
SAS,
armored forces still green, still learning the brutal arithmetic of war, found themselves scattered across 50 miles of broken terrain. Units that had never fought together, crews that did not know each other's names, suddenly depended on the same fragile lifeline. The clear, unwavering voice carried through SCR-508 radios. Even in retreat, the radios held their ground. Tank commanders relayed enemy movements, requested artillery fire, and warned isolated platoons of German thrusts. What should have been a complete collapse, instead, became a lesson brutal, costly, but invaluable in the power of staying connected. German intercept teams listened in disbelief. How could American units maintain coordination at ranges where German Fuji-5 sets produced only static? The pattern grew sharper in Italy. The steep ridgelines and winding valleys of the Apennines should have favored German doctrine. Visual communication was impossible. Signals disappeared behind stone and forest, and even experienced radio operators struggled with reflections that distorted amplitude-modulated transmissions. Yet the American FM sets thrived in these conditions. Sherman platoons, separated by mountains, maneuvered as if on level ground, calling out enemy gun positions and synchronizing movement through terrain that reduced German radios to silence. What should have been an equalizer became an amplifier of American strength. Then came Normandy. On June 6, 1944, as Shermans rolled off landing craft into the churned waters off Omaha Beach, their radios linked them instantly to naval fire support and to command ships far offshore. No German armored formation possessed anything comparable. But in the hedgerows of Normandy, a new problem emerged. American infantry, equipped with SCR-300 radios on different frequency bands, could not warn Sherman crews of Panzerfaust ambushes, hidden behind the living walls of earth and vegetation. For a moment, the advantage fractured. The solution arrived from the front lines themselves. Crews welded ammunition boxes to their tanks and mounted EE-8 field telephones inside them, wired directly to the intercom. With a single adaptation born of necessity, American tanks and infantry became a unified force again. By the time Operation Cobra began in late July, the communication gap had vanished. Cobra revealed the full extent of what clear, universal radio communication could do. The 2nd Armored Division moved more than 200 Shermans through smoke, dust, and shattered road networks with a speed and precision that stunned the German Panzer Division. Artillery strikes arrived minutes after identification. Threats spotted miles away triggered immediate counteraction. To German crews fighting with failing radios and collapsing lines of communication, the Americans did not merely seem coordinated, they seemed omnipresent. And from that point forward, The battlefield belonged to the side that could speak, listen, and respond faster than the enemy could understand. By late 1944, the true weight of America's communication advantage began shaping not just individual clashes, but the fate of entire campaigns. Nowhere was this clearer than in the fields around Arracourt, where the U.S. 4th Armored Division confronted multiple German Panzer brigades, equipped with the formidable Panther tanks superior in armor, optics, and firepower. On paper, the matchup bordered on hopeless. In battle, it became something else entirely. Every Sherman in the 4th Armored Division, no matter how outgunned, could report enemy movement the moment it appeared. Tank destroyer units received targeting information from Shermans positioned miles away, enabling them to strike first. Artillery observers, riding in command tanks wired to the same radio net, called down barrages within minutes. The Panthers, powerful as they were, fought in isolation. Their communications faltered with every burst of engine noise, every shift in terrain, every disruption of command vehicles. The result was a 3-week contest in which the 4th Armored Division destroyed 281 German armored vehicles, while losing only 41 Shermans, a kill ratio that contradicted every expectation of raw mechanical superiority. The consequences stretched far beyond the battlefield. German commanders began to realize that their tactical assumptions, particularly the belief that destroying command tanks would paralyze American units, were catastrophically flawed. They continued to aim for vehicles with multiple antennas, not understanding that every Sherman in the formation was a command tank in all but name. This miscalculation repeated itself across France and into the German heartland, where destroyed panzer formations often left behind radios drifting off frequency or failing under electrical interference. Then came the shock at Remagen in March 1945. When the Ludendorff Bridge was found intact, a single radio report from the 9th Armored Division rippled outward in minutes. Entire divisions shifted, artillery repositioned, logistics rerouted. Within an hour, American forces were moving to exploit an opportunity that should have vanished before they could reach it. German units, reliant on damaged telephone lines and AM sets crippled by interference, responded with delays measured not in minutes, but in hours. Their counterattacks arrived piecemeal, uncoordinated, and were destroyed, one by one. The final collapse unfolded in the Ruhr pocket. As American armored columns executed a double envelopment coordinated entirely through radio networks, more than 300,000 German troops found themselves trapped. Inside the pocket, German communications disintegrated. Field Marshal Walter Models, final messages fragmented. Desperate spoke of units cut off from headquarters, regiments unable to communicate with each other, commanders fighting blind. The human dimension of this disparity was profound. American tank crews entered battle, knowing they were never truly alone. Even in smoke, even in darkness, a voice from another Sherman could reach them. German crews, on the other hand, often fought their battles as isolated duels, Panthers and Panzer IVs reduced to individual survivors in a war defined by coordination. In those final months of the war, the lesson became unmistakable. Even the strongest armor fractures when it cannot speak, cannot hear, and cannot act as part of something larger than itself. In the aftermath of these decisive campaigns, a broader truth emerged on that reached far beyond tank duels or battlefield maneuvers. The American triumph in armored warfare was not simply the result of better industry, larger armies, or favorable logistics. It reflected a philosophical shift, the belief that information, not armor, would govern the future of war. To American strategists, the SCR-508 was more than an accessory. It was the foundation of a flexible combat command structure that allowed units to form, dissolve, and reform into mission-specific task forces. This adaptability baffled the German officers, accustomed to rigid organization, where communication scarcity forced hierarchy rather than encouraged creativity. By contrast, American commanders could combine infantry, armor, artillery, and reconnaissance units with confidence that they would remain in seamless contact. Other nations took notice. After the war, Soviet engineers studying captured German and American equipment reached a stark conclusion. Germany had built superior tanks, but America had built superior systems. The Red Army, recognizing the limitations of its wartime communications, where a majority of T-34s fought without radio scose to emulate American designs for its post-war armored doctrine. Soviet field manuals echoed the lessons drawn from Sherman formations. Without universal radio deployment, massed armor becomes a liability rather than an asset. In West Germany, the newly formed Bundeswehr confronted the past with unusual clarity. Training manuals emphasized that German defeat often stemmed not from inferior vehicles, but from inferior communication. Every Leopard tank manufactured carried advanced radio capabilities, reflecting a doctrine shaped directly by the failures of the FUG-5. In time, NATO as a whole adopted the same principle, advancing toward a vision of warfare where instant information exchange was the central combat multiplier. Modern conflicts only reinforced these lessons. In the Gulf War of 1991, American and coalition forces, wielding sophisticated digital networks, overwhelmed Iraqi units equipped with individually formidable Soviet-designed tanks, but crippled by outdated radios. In 2003, the same pattern reappeared. Fast-moving, highly connected formations outpaced opponents, whose armored vehicles still relied on limited, inconsistent communications. Across decades and continents, the verdict remained consistent. The victories achieved by Sherman crews in 1943 and 1944 were not accidents of history. They were the first clear demonstration that network-centric warfare triumphs over platform-centric warfare. A tank's gun might decide a duel, but its ability to communicate decides a campaign. In the final months of World War II, as the smoke settled over ruined cities and armored columns rolled to a halt along the Rhine and the Elbe, something deeper than victory or defeat came into focus. The war had revealed a truth long hidden beneath the clash of steel and fire, that on a modern battlefield, the most decisive advantage is not always visible. It does not roar like an engine or strike like a shell. Sometimes it moves quietly, carried on a wavelength, traveling from one crew to another, binding individual soldiers into a force greater than themselves. For the Sherman crews, the SCR-508 was more than a piece of equipment bolted inside the hull. It was the reason they never felt abandoned in the fog of war. A tank immobilized by mud was not lost. A platoon cut off by smoke was not silent. A commander thrown into chaos could still hear the steady voice of another crew miles away. That connection created a kind of battlefield resilience the Germans could not match, no matter how thick their armor or how powerful their guns. For the German crews, the contrast was painful. Many fought with unmatched skill and bravery, yet they entered each engagement knowing that if their commander fell or their radio faltered, they would face the enemy alone. Isolation defined their war as much as any tactical decision. In memoirs written long after the fighting ended, German tank veterans recalled not just the shock of American coordination, but the loneliness that shaped their final battles. The legacy of these encounters reaches far beyond the 1940s. Modern armored warfare, from the deserts of Kuwait to the streets of Baghdad, still reflects the lesson first, proven by the Sherman, that information dominance outweighs platform superiority. Today's networked battlefields trace their lineage directly to those early FM radios humming inside steel hulls crossing North Africa. And so the question lingers for us, decades later. If the invisible advantage of communication could reshape an entire war, what does that mean for the conflicts of our own time? For those who study history, for veterans who carried these lessons forward, and for anyone who believes that understanding the past helps safeguard the future. The story of the Sherman's radio is more than a technical footnote. It is a reminder that wars are not only won by strength, but by connection, by the ability to act together when everything else threatens to tear units apart. If this story speaks to you, share your thoughts. What do you believe is the greatest lesson modern warfare inherited from the battlefields of World War II?